Okay guys, so this is part 2 of the video tutorial series for working with the Blender exporter tool that was created by user Boo342. So without further ado, let's just dive in. Here we go. Okay everybody, welcome to part 2 of my tutorial series of working with the special software package released by user Boo342, and it essentially allows us to export models and animation sequences from within the software program Blender over into a special file format which we can then use some additional tools to parse out the data that we need in order to create N64 display lists. This is part 2 in the series that I'm creating, and in today's video we're going to be going over the process of creating a low poly robot walker model. And this is the model that I used in the first video of this series, and I demonstrated the overall process. And so in today's video we're going to be going over creating that low poly robot walker model. So to start off, I need you guys to go on the internet and do an image search for character robot turnaround. So essentially this provides a reference image that we can use that has front, side, and back reference shots of a character that we can use to essentially help us, trace and mold the various boxes and meshes that we import into our scene in order to create the desired shape of the character that we're trying to model. Now again, you can go ahead and use any reference image you want if you want to model a specific type of character in your scene, but I do have a reference image, a turnaround reference image that we can use that's specifically for this robot that I've used in this tutorial video. I have a couple of QR codes here for you guys, and just a cool reference there to my website. And if you guys get this one, if you guys get that, I'm giving you guys some bonus points for having good taste in films. I just thought it was kind of a cool joke to throw at you. So anyway, I'll get you guys to save this image to your local C. So just right click on the image here and select Save Image As, or the equivalent of that function depending on your browser that you're using. Just a heads up, this is an old version of Windows that I'm using. This is a PC that I have for Dreamcast and N64 development. It's a Windows 7 machine, and I'm using a version 291 of Blender, but rest assured the software package that we're using in this series does work with later versions of Blender. So you're all good there. So once we have that image downloaded on our C drive, you can open it up in Windows Explorer, and what we're going to do is just drag that image over into our scene. But there's a couple of things I want to do before we do that. So in the new scene that you've created in Blender, just select the camera and sample box here and hit delete. Delete that for now. I'm also going to activate Screencast Keys, so I'll hit N on my keyboard, go to Screencast Keys and reactivate this, so that you're able to follow along and see what I'm doing here with my mouse and keyboard. So we'll also hit numpad 1, and that's going to correct the orientation of our viewport so that when we do drag the image in, it'll be perfectly in line for a front view of our viewport. So now we just make sure we have this selected, and we hit G to grab and move. So now we're able to move it around the screen here. And we're also going to scale this up. So we'll hit S to scale, and then we pull down on our mouse here, drag downward, and we'll bring this up to a decent size. Hit G again to move it, and we're going to try and line this up to the Cartesian plane here as best we can. It doesn't have to be exact, but that's pretty good there. So then we'll click the move view here, the little hand, and click and drag. Okay, so that's a good view there. Now if we change the view perspective here, you'll see that we have it perfectly in line on the x-axis. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to move this a little bit so that we'll have room here to model our character, and yet when we hit numpad 1 we still have a front view of our reference image there. So we'll hit numpad 3 to change to the side view, and we'll hit G to grab, and then Y to select the Y axis, and we'll drag this back to about here. And then when we change the perspective again, you'll see that we've shifted things so we have a little bit of room here to model our character. So one thing we're going to do is add this image to a collection. So we'll create a new collection for this. So we select the image here and press M to move to collection, and then click on new collection, and then we'll call this robot background. Okay. So now you see we have robot background, and we can easily click on the icon here to hide it from view. So it's just a good thing to have done. Now we're going to add a cube into our scene here that we'll use to model the head of the robot. Now in order to do that, let's change our perspective here to front view, and we hit numpad 1 to change to a front view. Now we're going to move our cursor, the Blender cursor, right directly in front of the robot head reference image. So we can hit shift right click, or you can also use the cursor controller here and then just simply click here. So just either one works fine. So now what we're going to do is hit Shift A for add, select mesh, and then cube. And so there'll be a cube here placed in front. So now if we change our perspective here, you'll see that it is pretty much directly in half with that reference image that we had. So we're going to want to bring this forward over to the center of our screen here. So to do that, we just make sure that we have the box selected. So now over on our toolbar here under item, for the Y axis, let's reset that to 0 and then hit enter. Now you'll see that that has moved the cube directly into the center of our viewport here in our scene. Now what we're going to need to do is actually duplicate the background reference image. So we'll single click on our background image here, and then we press Shift D to duplicate, and then single click to drop that duplicated image. And if we press G, you should now see that we have 2 of those reference images. So we'll just hit escape to drop that back into place. Now we'll hit R for rotate and choose the Z axis and then 90. And then hit enter. And now you'll see that we have 2 of those reference images in place. Now we still have to move this over, so it's still selected here, so we'll hit G, and then we'll move that along the X axis. And we'll shift this over to right just before it starts to merge with the other. This is the first reference image. So now when we hit numpad 1, we have a front view, and then when we hit numpad 3, we can then shift this view, this background image over so that we are viewing it directly in center with our Cartesian plane here with the side view. So it's still selected here, and we hit G for grab, and then we'll hit Y for the Y axis. And now we're going to shift this over just so that it's perfectly centered with that Cartesian plane there. So now we have a perfect side view, and so when we switch between front view, numpad 1, and side view, numpad 3, we have the robot in view of how we want to model. And that's a perfect reference for us to use while we're modeling. So let's rename these. We have the front view and the side view reference images. So we'll select the front view, and we'll come over here to the right side of our screen, and we will select this here, front view, enter, and then the second one, which is our second reference image, and double click, and we'll say side view, enter. There we go. So now we can easily hide those from view whenever need be. Alright, so our next step is to start to model the robot head using the cube that we inserted into our scene here. So in order to do that, we have to enter edit mode. So we just make sure that we have our cube selected, and then we press tab on our keyboard, and that enters edit mode. Now we'll just change the perspective here, and you should see that we have all these different vertices here to play with in order to manipulate. Now we can go up here at the top of our toolbar and select face select, and then we can easily select all the different faces of the box, and it'll select all of the vertices associated with that face. So for this first edit that we're doing, let's switch to our side view. So we hit numpad 3. And now that we have that face selected, we can hit G to grab, and then we're going to move this over just to bring it and match it to where it is on that side. And if we go back to the front view by hitting numpad 1, we can then hit G, and we can shift this over to about there, and then we're going to scale this up a little bit. So we hit S, and then we bring this up just about there. I'm thinking that's probably the right size. So now we'll change our perspective here again, and so you can start to see how it's starting to manipulate there. So now we'll switch over here, and we'll select this face side by clicking on it here, and then numpad 3 to switch back to our side view. We have this side of the face selected, so we hit G to grab, and we'll bring that up to about there, and then S to scale it. And we'll bring this up to try and match that size. So we can see we need to shift it a little bit still. So maybe what we'll do is bring it up like that, and then G to grab, and then press Z. And then we can slide this down just a little bit. And you can see we're still off just slightly. We're pretty close. We still have this is just not quite. So if we actually shift this up and select this side, face select, and switch back to side view, and then if we hit G to grab, we can then move that right up to match. That's not perfect, but it's pretty close. Numpad 1, you can still see we're just a bit off there on that side, so we could correct that switching over, selecting this face, switching back to numpad 1, and then selecting G to shift that. You could probably place it about there. That's pretty good. I'm pretty comfortable with that. So that's our robot head manipulated and modeled according to the reference images. That's pretty good. Alright, so let's continue, and we will add some new shapes into our scene so we can continue creating the legs, the body, and the feet. So we'll start with the neck, the body of the robot. And in this image I originally used a cylinder, but there's a lot more vertice points when you're using a cylinder in comparison to a cube. Now, in order for us to add additional shapes into our scene, we have to make sure that we're not in edit mode. We hit tab, we will then exit edit mode, and you can see that we are now in object mode. So now what we'll do is hit Shift A for add, mesh, and cube. So now we have a new cube, and we can hit G to move, and we'll bring that down to about here. And we can scale that down a little bit. So we'll hit S, G. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of shifting things along here. So now I'll go to the side view, and we can see that it's way over here. Now, why did that happen? It's because our cursor for Blender was placed over here. So we'll hit G, and we'll bring this over. There we go. So now if we use our Cartesian coordinate, we can see how that's shaped up. We're going to zoom in here a little bit and shape it up. Now we're going to switch to edit mode. So we'll hit tab on our keyboard, and we'll select faces again, and we'll select this face, and we'll hit side view, so numpad 3, and then G to grab, and in the Z axis, so we press Z on the keyboard, and then we'll bring this up, grabbing it and moving it up inside of the cube of the robot head, just so that it's out of the way. Left click on the mouse, and we're done. So there we go, we have that shape for the neck. So the next step, we'll exit edit mode, so we'll hit tab on our keyboard, and we'll enter object mode. And I think that it's important that we start to classify these and enter these objects into their own collection. But first we'll name them. So we have the head object selected. And so we'll go over here to our definitions here, and we'll rename this cube to head, enter. And then the neck, we'll select that object, double click, and neck, enter. Here we go. Now we can also add these to their own collection. So we have that selected, and we press M to move to collection, and we'll say new collection, and we'll say my robot, enter, and go OK. So now we have the head is entered into that collection, and we will do the same with the neck. So we hit M to move, and now we go down here to my robot. Select that. So now at any point we can just simply hide the robot from view. So now we're going to add the cubes for the hips. And so if we hit numpad 1, and I was a little bit off here with this one, but that's okay. So now what we're actually going to do is, if we change our perspective here, now you can see that our Blender cursor is over here on our reference image. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually bring it over here to where we want the new cubes to be located. So we'll press shift right click, and now you can see that our cursor is located there. Now before we add the cube into the scene, we'll hit numpad 1, and we'll hit shift A for add, and then mesh cube. Now we'll hit G to grab, X on the X-axis, and shift this over, and then we'll scale it down. Press S to scale, and then we'll scale this down to a decent size that we think would work. And G, X, shift it over, put it there. Now what we're actually going to do is copy this, so we'll hit Shift D to duplicate X in the X-axis and drag it over to about there. That's pretty good. So now when we change the perspective here, we'll see that we have the two cubes directly on the side of the neck object. Okay, so we're going to start to model the legs for the robot. So if we hit 3 on our numpad, switch to a side view, and we'll hit Shift A to add a new cube. Cube. So there we go. And we're going to scale this, so we'll hit S to scale, and we'll bring this down, and we'll bring it just a little bit bigger. Right there, I think. So we'll hit rotate, so we'll hit R. We're going to rotate this just about like that. There we go, that's good for now. G to grab, shift it down a little bit. That's good there. So let's switch to the front view, so we'll hit numpad 1. And then we'll hit G to grab, and then we are going to shift this over on the X axis. So we'll just shift this over to about here, and we'll probably have to scale this up a little bit. We'll hit S. I think that's good there. Okay, so we'll hit 3 on the numpad. So now to continue, we're going to switch into edit mode. So we have to hit Tab on our keyboard, edit mode. We have faces selected, which is fine. We select this face, and we're actually going to hit S to scale that down just a little bit, right about there. And now we'll change our perspective again, shift around, and we're going to grab this face. And now we're going to go to a side view. So we hit numpad 3, and we're going to hit G to grab. We're going to bring that down to about here. And then we'll hit S to scale. And if we change our perspective here, we should see how that's starting to take shape. It's not too bad. We'll hit 1 on our keyboard. We can see how it's not exactly positioned correctly. We'll hit S to scale in the X-axis. We can scale it up a little bit. And then we'll go to about there, I think. And then if we hit 3 on our keypad, that looks good there. Okay, so we'll change the perspective here and we'll select this face of the cube, go back to side view, 3 on our numpad, hit G to grab. Now we can position this correctly. So we want this sort of right in the middle of that icosphere. So right about there, I would think. The next step is for us to essentially duplicate this again. Before we duplicate it, we have to make sure we exit edit mode. So we hit tab on our keyboard, make sure we have the object selected, press Shift D to duplicate, X in the X-axis, and slide this over to about here. We release it there. So now when we zoom around, we can start to see the legs are starting to form there. So that's pretty good. It's not exactly perfect, but it's pretty close. So now we're going to add the echospheres, which we'll use for the joints in the legs. So we'll just move our cursor to the right location and we'll hit Shift right click, and then we'll hit numpad 3, and then if we hit Shift A to add mesh, and then we're going to actually go down here and select icosphere, and there we can see our icosphere. And now we're going to scale this down a little bit. We're going to shrink this down to about this size here, and then we'll G to grab, and we'll bring it over to about here. There we go. We hit 1 on our keypad and we see it's in a pretty good position there. That's pretty good. So now we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate and X to move that on the X-axis, and we'll slide this right over here to that same location. So now if we change our perspective, we should see that we have those 2 icospheres in place for the joints. So it's pretty straightforward. So this is pretty much the same process for the rest of the legs and the joints. We're going to be using the same method to model the different objects. The only thing that's slightly different is the way that I modeled the feet. So I'm going to show you guys a little step here that you can follow. We're in object mode, so we hit Shift A and mesh cube. So then we grab that and we'll bring that down to the foot area there. 3 on the keypad, and we'll grab and shift that over in the Y axis. Slide that over. We'll bring that down about there. So now we're going to enter edit mode. So we'll hit tab. And now we'll shift down here. We'll move our view a little bit further down. Now we're going to switch to face select. And we're going to grab the top face. Then we'll hit front view. We'll hit G to grab. And in the Z axis, we'll move this down to about there. And we'll shift that around and we'll select this face. Go to numpad 3 for a side view. Hit G to grab, and we'll bring this over in the Y axis. And we're going to drag this over to about here. Drag to the front, select that face in the front. Back to our side view, numpad 3, G to grab, Y axis, slide this over, and left click to release. So now if we hit numpad 1, we have the basic shape of the foot. Now one thing I use to model the feet for the robot is what's called a loop cut. So essentially what we do is we make sure that we're in edit mode and we have one of the faces selected. And then we hit Control R. Now you should see this little yellow selection show up, and that's just essentially asking you which axis you want to apply a cut in this object. And so I'm going to apply it on this axis here. So I single click to select that axis. And then I can then choose where I want to have the cut be applied. So I'm going to select one here, and I'll hit Control R again, select that axis, and now I'll choose where I want it to be applied. I'll choose right about here. That's good enough for me. And we select this face here. We'll change our perspective here a little bit. Now if I say S to scale, and we start to shape that down, hit numpad 1, and we'll hit G, and we'll select the Z axis, and we'll bring this down right above the floor there. That's good for me. So you can see how we're starting to take the shape there, and you can start to add more loop cuts, and you can do that as you see fit. So I'm just going to let you guys move ahead and model the rest of the legs using the methods that I showed you guys here today. Another thing that's important for us to do is over here on the right side of our screen, we have to make sure that we add all of the cube shapes that we've added into our scene, as well as the echospheres. Once you have them all placed in, it's good to just rename them based on the part that it is, whether it's a leg, upper leg, middle leg, lower leg, that kind of a thing, or a knee joint. You can go in there and name these as you see fit, and from there then we can add them into the My Robot collection. So that's something else that's good to do. And from there, that's pretty much it. And so in the next video, we're going to be adding a bone structure to this. And so then we'll be implementing inverse kinematics and moving forward with animating this robot and doing some walk cycles and run cycles. So I may split that up into 2 videos, but the next video will be definitely adding the bone structure to this and rigging the model. And from there we'll be creating a walk cycle and an idle cycle, and maybe if we have time we'll do a run cycle. So that's pretty much it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.